In John 14:14, Jesus makes an amazing promise. If you ask me anything in my name, I will do it. But then in the very next verse, he balances it by saying, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And it's an interesting question whether he says you will keep, or you must keep, or you should keep. What did Jesus say? I've got the four most important Greek texts up here. The NA28, its earlier version 27, and then the UBS 5, its earlier version, and then the Tyndale Greek text. And what's interesting is that they all choose the future, te resita. But when you get over to some of these other translations, like the NIV 11, if you love me, keep my commandments, they turn it into a command. If you go back to the 84 NIV, it's a future. You will obey my command. And I always think it's interesting when a translation from edition to another edition changes. Normally there's something going on there. And you'll notice over in the NLT that they, like the new NIV, go with the command, obey. So what's going on in these verses? Well, as you might expect, there's a textual problem. So if you go over here and look at the textual issues and come down here, you can see te resata, there's your imperative. Te reseta, there's your subjunctive, you should keep. And then the text is the future, you will keep. And if you come over here to Metzger's notes, you can see what's going on. He says the majority of the committee prefer the future instead of the imperative. And one of the arguments, while the manuscript evidence is pretty weak on this, they draw a comparison to the future in the next verse. So the idea is, if you love me, you will keep my commandments, and I will ask the Father. So they're seeing the future over here in 14:16 as an evidence that this initially was also a future. I should also mention, if you want to come over here to the UBS 5 text and you want to look at their references, they're always much more complete. But notice that it gives it a C rating. In other words, a C rating isn't a flip of the coin, but there's just not a lot of strong evidence to support this reading or this reading or this reading. And I should point out that when you look at the different variations, their pronunciation is almost identical. Te resata, te reseta, and then the text te reseta. You can see how, especially if manuscripts were copied by dictation, that those could easily be confused. Because the manuscript evidence is so weak, you're probably going to have to make up your mind based on flow. Do you think that Jesus would have said, you will keep, or that you should keep, or that you must keep? But now let's think for a second. What's the difference between saying, you will keep my commandments, and you will keep my commandments, meaning you must keep my commandments? What's the difference? Well, if it's an indicative future, it's saying, if it is true that you love me, that means that you will keep my commandments. If it's an imperative force, he's saying, if you love me, then you must keep my commandments. So they're very close in meaning, but they're not quite the same thing, are they? If it's a future, the force is being put on the if clause. If you love me, well, here's what's going to happen. You will keep my commandments. But if you put the force on the verb we're looking at, it becomes more of an imperatival idea. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. I suspect that Jesus meant the simple future, even though it does carry an imperatival force. I think the force of this is, if you love me, then you will keep my commandments. Some people equate love with obedience. I just think that's totally wrong. Certainly, if you love someone, then you will do what they have asked you to do, or you will do what you should do. But if Robin says to me, Bill, will you take out the trash? And I take out the trash, but there's no emotion behind it. I'm simply being obedient. Am I her husband, or am I just the hired help? If I mow the lawn, am I the gardener or the husband? See, love will show itself in obedience, but obedience is not love. Love is a larger category, and it involves way more things than obedient. If my children were perfectly obedient, but there was no emotional attachment, would you say that they love me? No, of course not. It probably would mean that they're scared to death of me and they're just doing whatever I tell them to do out of fear. So love is the greater category, but one way in which love shows itself is in obedience to his good commands.